All right. We'll just get rolling, and if they join us, they'll join us. If not, it'll be taped, so they'll get a chance to take a look at it later. I'm going to really try to stick to the schedule. I know I talked to a few of you. Last meeting went really long. I appreciate your patience, but I really wanted to make sure everybody had an opportunity and felt comfortable bringing up any concerns. And we talked about a lot of different issues last time, so I'm going to really try to focus in on use of force on this one because it really is the topic, major topic in law enforcement and in our community. I wanted to follow up with the old business just for a few minutes here. We talked about recruitment at the last session, the last meeting. We just opened up another recruitment process, and some of you might have saw our new recruitment video on our Facebook page. We've got an officer who's got a degree in journalism, and he's kind of a video nut. He's really good with working cameras and putting together videos. But he put together a really nice video interviewing our female officers, just asking them. It wasn't scripted. He just sat down with them and he asked them, why did you come to the APD? What do you think about policing? Why are you here? Why do you do what you do? And that video is on our Facebook page. And I've watched it like 15 times because I just like it. I love the ladies. They did an awesome job. But that's one of the videos that we're putting together out there for this recruitment. Another one is very similar. It's with our officers who are people of color. So that one they're putting together. We also have a video that we've talked to different employees, like employees who came here from other agencies. We call them lateral transfers. So officers that come here from a different agency. We interviewed them to ask them why they left their agency and why they came to Appleton Police Department, and encouraging other officers to apply for us. So that recruitment process is open. You'll see some more of those videos coming out probably in the next few weeks or a month, as soon as they can put them together. So this recruitment cycle, we're really going reaching out for a larger pool of diverse candidates, African American, Hispanic, Southeast Asian, diversity in life experiences, female applicants, trying to grow that pool that we talked about last time. We've got 4 new officers starting in January. The 4 that are starting, one is a female, one is African American male, one is a Hispanic male. So that's the kind of diversity that we would love to see with every one of our processes, but we need to grow the pool of diverse candidates. All quality, really amazing people. We're really lucky to have them. 2 of them will be going to our academy, and 2 of them will go right into patrol. The other discussion we had a little bit was about inclusion. And I talked to some of our officers about why they aren't interested in leadership roles or supervision roles. And it really comes down to personal preferences. A lot of people, especially nowadays, are not interested in becoming a supervisor or a boss. It's very challenging in law enforcement now to be involved in administration. We have 40% of our female command staff or 40% of our command staff is female. So we've got 5 employees in our command staff, and 2 of them are female. We have people of color in all of our special units. One of our canine officers, investigations, our behavioral health officer, our school resource officers. So they're spread around their department, and they really enjoy the jobs they're doing now. So it's not one of those things where there's a lot of interest in being a supervisor. At some point, we hope some of them will think about it. But right now they're enjoying what they're doing and like what they're doing. So we'll continue to have those discussions with them. We reached out and asked if there's anybody that'd be willing to do other recruitment videos for us, and we did get some feedback, and we got some suggestions. So we're really going to try to push out that recruitment on our website and through social media and through normal media. I've got a session I'm doing Thursday morning with one of the TV stations. We'll talk about our diversity and our recruitment during that community update session. So Does anybody have any follow-up questions on any of those topics that we talked about last week? No? All right. Just last week, I hopefully all of you have heard about the governor, or the speaker actually put together a task force on racial disparity in the state of Wisconsin. And we've got a Republican representative, which is Jim Steineke from Kaukauna, and then Representative Stubbs, who is from Madison, a Democrat. The purpose of this task force was to bring together all the parties involved in the discussion of different opinions and try to find out what we can change in the state to address racial disparity, not just in law enforcement, but in all of our systems. So there was a meeting last week in Green Bay on racial disparity in law enforcement. I was able to speak to them for a couple hours and take questions. They were specifically interested in the two things that we've talked about already: community engagement. What's Appleton doing for community engagement, and how did we get to the point that we're at now? And then secondly was our use of force process and how we address use of force, how we train it, how we track it, and how we monitor it. So I'm going to give you a presentation here on our use of force. I can guarantee you will have a ton of questions. The booklet that I have, I don't know if you can see it. Well, this is the report. So it's 180 pages long. These are the documents and the charts. So literally, we broke down every use of force in the last 10 years in the city of Appleton. I'm only going to be able to give you an overview in the next 20 minutes or half an hour or so. So we'll have time for some questions after that. But as I go through this, if you could just write down any questions that come to mind, because I'm sure we're not going to have time to get to all of them. But I want you to follow up with me either with a phone call or an email. And then what I'll do is I'll kind of put together a blog. I'll put together all the questions I was asked, and then I'll answer them, and then I'll fire them off to you. Hopefully that'll save us some time, and it'll give you guys some time to kind of think about what your questions might be. If you're like me, you sit through these presentations, and about half an hour later, when you lay down to go to bed, like 10 questions pop into your head like, crap, I wish I would have asked that question. So this will give you the chance to kind of do that. Try to share my screen. Beth, you're going to have to help me out here to make sure I do this right. So, all right. You see the PowerPoint, Beth?
Yep.
You do?
Yeah. And we have the PowerPoint and then the slides. Oh, now it's full screen. Yep. Perfect.
So it's just full screen.
Right.
All right. Okay. All right. Like I said, I'll go through this. Write down any questions you may have. And then I'll try to get to as many as we can after this. We'll still have time at the end for a roundtable and talk about other issues or questions you might have. So, Appleton Police Department Use of Force Report. This is a 10-year report. This was put together by Lieutenant Bill Krieg. What is unique? Well, why is use of force so important? Number one, it is the greatest authority that we have in law enforcement. There's no other authority that is granted by the citizens or government that is more powerful than the use of force. It's literally the ability to take away someone's freedom and take away their life. So we talk with our officers frequently, and they understand that also means it is the greatest responsibility that we have. And if we violate that public trust even once, like we've seen happen in other parts of the country and even our state, that is damaging to the department that we may not recover from. So that's why use of force is so important. So the data that we put together, this is a 10-year report. It's kind of surprising to other agencies when we talk about how we gather use of force, because Appleton has been collecting this data for over 20 years. You hear a lot of agencies that are now just discussing best practices of collecting specific data when they use force and how they review force. I'm proud to say that this department's been doing it over 20 years, and it's because of former chiefs like Chief Gorski and Chief Myers that were progressive and way ahead of the curve. That gave us the ability to do things like this. So this report is for the last 10 years. This is specific to the city of Appleton. So this isn't statewide or countywide. This is specifically for the city of Appleton. Like I said, the report is 179 pages long. It's one of the first questions that usually come up with use of force, and we've heard it a lot, is, so who determines when and how we use force? And this slide basically answers that question. It's constitutional. When we use force against an individual, it is technically a seizure of that person. So it is guided under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. That's what directs us. Our use of force policy is 18 pages long, but it boils down to basically what you see in front of you, the 3 steps. There is mandatory language in our policy. It's specifically mandatory. It directs and orders every officer that they shall only use the amount of force that's reasonable to control a situation. And it's based on the DAT, Defense and Arrest Tactic System, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It directs them that they shall not use force beyond what's reasonable to maintain control once a subject stops resisting, and they shall not brandish, display, or threaten to use any weapon or device unless they reasonably conclude that it can be justified. That is our use of force policy in a nutshell. Like I said, it's 18 pages long. One of the other things that we do, if you want to read the full 18 pages, it is on our website. If you just go to appletonpolice.org, and on the left-hand side, it's in a drop-down box where you can see this policy, the body camera policy, a couple other policies. So the Defense and Arrest Tactics and the Law Enforcement Standards Board. DAT, which I'll call it, is a system of verbalization skills coupled with physical alternatives. So it's verbal first. If our verbalization skills don't work, then we have physical alternatives. The Law Enforcement Standards Board, this is a group that decides on what is the curriculum of training in Wisconsin for law enforcement. They determine and make recommendations on what our standards are. And again, they follow a constitutional law and court decisions when they make their guidelines and their standards. So Law Enforcement Standards Board is not just police officers. It is appointed by the governor, but it also includes civilians, instructors, lawyers, community members who have a specialty in use of force. And they are on the standards board. So this Law Enforcement Standards Board determines what our standards are across the state for using force, using firearms, emergency vehicle operation, and other disciplines. I am currently on the Curriculum Advisory Board. The Curriculum Advisory Committee is actually a subcommittee of the LESB. And what we do is we review the curriculum in the Law Enforcement Academy that the recruits get. And we make recommendations to the Law Enforcement Standards Board. So just for instance, one of the things that my committee recommended to the board just last year were some changes in de-escalation, changing some of the verbiage in the manual to focus more on de-escalation. Some of the other changes we've done in the past is to recommend they make changes in the amount of bias-based policing training that the recruits get and crisis intervention training. So that's one of the things that we do. And that's all tied into our use of force. Every year, every officer in the state of Wisconsin has to retain their certification. So you may hear discussions about officers being decertified or officers moving from one department to another department after they get fired or terminated. In the state of Wisconsin, you will be certified after you attend the recruit academy and you're hired by an agency. After you're hired by that agency, it is then on that agency every year to train you a minimum of 24 hours. You are then required to report that training to the Department of Justice. If you do not report that training to the Department of Justice, they will decertify that officer and send you a letter that he no longer or she no longer can be a police officer. Part of that training is also mandated training in firearms and mandated training in emergency vehicle operations. So we have a reporting system in place to Department of Justice to keep our officers certified. That also kind of comes into play when we have officers that leave our agency. Now, thankfully, we had not many that have left the agency. And when they do, it's usually a retirement or they go to a different agency in good standing. But if an officer leaves the agency because he's either terminated or he is under or she is under investigation at the time, or they resign in lieu of being terminated, we report that to the state. And any future employer that they apply for will have access to that, and they will know that. So that is something, again, where the state of Wisconsin is a little ahead of the curve. Disturbance resolution model. So this is the model that we follow in the state of Wisconsin when we approach an incident and try to resolve a disturbance. The first question is three things that we look at. The first one is our approach considerations. Can we legally be there? And is it desirable for us to be there? Now, there's some times where we can legally be there, but it's not desirable at the time because we don't have the resources to handle it safely, or tactically, we don't have the resources available, or it's an incident where we just want to disengage, where we don't really need to be there, and it's not in our interest or the community's interest to be there, so we don't engage. We disengage and we leave, which is an option. The second one is one we're going to talk about specifically, and that's the intervention options, the use of force. And the third step is what happens after, the follow-through considerations. Once we use force or take someone into custody, our responsibilities don't end. We still have to stabilize them. We have to calm them down, provide medical aid, search them safely, escort and transport them, turn them over to whoever we're going to turn them over to, and then document it. So that is the disturbance resolution model. The model has been into place for over 20 years. I was a trainer back in the 1990s, and that's what the model was back then, and that's what it still is now. So the intervention options, which is the use of force. There's basically 5 steps to our use of force intervention options. The first two are presence and dialogue. 99.99% of all of our contacts are resolved with these 2 steps. Just being visible and just using dialogue, professional communication skills, de-escalation techniques, and obtaining that verbal or that voluntary compliance. This handles everything from a traffic stop to a barking dog to a weapons complaint. We listen, then we mediate, and we try to negotiate a resolution. If these don't work, then we move to the physical alternatives, which are the control alternatives, which we're going to go through in a minute here. They go from a control alternative of just grabbing someone's arm and escorting them maybe out of a bar, all the way up to deadly force. Now this slide talks about de-escalation. We have been training de-escalation in the state of Wisconsin for decades. It's been called a lot of different things. I remember in the 90s training de-escalation before it was called that. So this is not a new technique or tool for law enforcement. As it says there, 99.99% of every contact we make is resolved using de-escalation and just presence and dialogue. The training that we receive in de-escalation is something that is given in the Recruit Academy, both in professional communication skills. There's mediation training that they receive. There's crisis intervention training that they receive. Cultural competency is in the academies, and bias and bias by proxy education is in the academies. We also include these concepts in our yearly training. So de-escalation is part of every piece of our use of force training. It is the first step, and it is discussed and trained every year. And on the right-hand side, you can see, if you had a chance to read what some of that is. My philosophy, or our philosophy here, is de-escalation isn't just a tool. It's not just a technique. It's not like something you wear on your belt. And I think where law enforcement needs to get to nationally, and there's a lot of agencies that are there. I think we're close to being there. I hope we're there. Is it needs to be a philosophy. It needs to be an overarching philosophy for your agency. For those that have been in Appleton for a while, you maybe remember the old Chevy Impalas. And our motto used to be on the bottom rocker of the doors of the Chevy Impala. It was fighting crime, solving problems. And I know what that means, and it is what we do. But there's also a message there. One of our captains, actually, when we're having these discussions post-Ferguson, recommended that we change that on our squad cars and we put our core values, because that's what we want to live. That's what we want to see every day. That's what we want people to see. So now on our squad cars, you'll see our 3 core values of compassion, integrity, courage. Because I think that points to a philosophy in law enforcement and a philosophy of policing that we embrace. So if de-escalation doesn't work, there's also disengagement, which I've talked about. This is a technique, and it is used in law enforcement, and that is to just leave a situation. There's many a times when I worked in a sheriff's department, a small sheriff's department, where there was only a couple officers on the road for the entire county, where sometimes you just disengage because it was safest for you and safest for the people involved, and you didn't need to act. That is an option. When de-escalation isn't working and disengagement isn't an option, then we move on to those control and protective alternatives. Now, there's 9 different types that we record at the Appleton Police Department, and we're going to go through each one of them. I'll kind of explain them to you, and then I'll talk about how often we use them and what our statistics show. Like I said, we'll go through these specifically and individually. But first, I want to talk a little bit about how we supervise and record use of force. This is something that is unusual for agencies. I think you're starting to see it become a little more common as best practices are discussed among law enforcement administrators. But anytime we use force, and use of force is defined as anytime we place someone on the ground, or we strike them, hit them, use one of our intervention options on them, that is considered use of force. When that happens, a supervisor is sent directly to the scene. They don't follow up and just read a report later. They are required to respond directly to the scene, to assess the scene and talk to the officers involved. This supervisor will then create a separate report. That report is several pages long, and they forward that information to both of our DAT coordinator and unified tactics coordinator, which is 2 separate lieutenants, our patrol captains, and the assistant chief. So those 5 people will review that report. They will also take a look at the report, and they will look at any of the body cam video or any of the audio, and they will compare that to the report just to verify its accuracy and their appropriateness. We log all of this into our database. If in a 1 year period, an officer has 5 uses of force, whether they are deemed appropriate or not, it is flagged. And another officer or another supervisor will be assigned to look at each one of those incidents again and meet with that officer. Not because they've done something wrong, but we're trying to identify a pattern of behavior. Is there something that this officer may be doing or may be saying that when you look at a specific incident, the use of force is still justified. But when you look at it in a totality with 5 other incidents within a year, is there some way that we can train them to not use the force? Or is there something that they're doing that can be corrected? Generally, it is not. Our use of forces have historically always been within policy. What we usually see with this is the officers that are assigned to the high school that has emotionally disturbed children. And it's generally some of the same kids that repeatedly they have to deal with. And the school staff calls them because they're out of control and breaking things or attacking people, and they have to hold them down. That's generally where we see this come up. So once the report is completed, it goes into our database. Like I said, we have that flag system that'll tell us if somebody's been involved in 5 in a year, so that we can review it again. But then all of this is given to the assistant chief and our use of force coordinator, Lieutenant Creed. And he will put together a yearly report, which he's done every year since I've been here. And then we publish that report on our website for anybody and everyone to read. Part of use of force requirements, I think, is that we are transparent and we publish our results and we publish what we learn from them. So the report not only includes the data that I'm going to show you, but it also includes lessons learned and how it's going to change our training going ahead. So now I want to get into the numbers for the last 10 years. I'll try to get through this fairly quickly here. So in the last 10 years, we've had, rounded up to 500,000 calls for service, 500,000. Of those 500,000 calls, we've had to use force in 577 of them. So that's basically 99.9% of our calls were resolved without using any type of force. Probably the most telling data is listed there in the last paragraph. We've made 46,000 arrests in the 10 years, so around 4,600 a year on average. And 98.8, almost 99% of those, we accomplished that arrest without having to use physical force. So we're talking arrest for armed robbery, sexual assault, aggravated assault, drug dealers who are going back to prison. Almost 99% of the time we accomplish the arrest without having to use physical force. How many of the people we use force against are Appleton residents? This is a little unique, but I think there's a slide later that's going to explain this. But almost a third, 32% of the people that we used force against were not Appleton residents. And another 10% gave an address of being homeless. Also significant, which I think is going to get explained at one of the slides coming up here, is the number that were under the influence when they were arrested. About 30% were under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And then it drops off after this pretty significantly. Domestic abuse, 8.2% of our use of force involved a domestic abuse arrest, which isn't surprising because those are generally crimes of violence, and they're mandatory arrest. So we can try de-escalation. It's not a type of call that we can walk away from. We're mandated to make an arrest, and so that sometimes leads to a resisting and a use of force. So what is the most common type of force used? And I'm going to list these from the most common to the least common. By far, the most common used is also our lowest level of force. So this is a decentralization. This is about 50% higher than our second most common. What a decentralization is basically taking a person and placing them on the ground. Some of the guidelines that we have when we train decentralization, and the academy trains it, is to control their descent and protect their head as you take them to the ground. Wrestlers know, if you've ever been a wrestler or watched them, when you're standing up, it's hard to control someone when you're standing up. And that's usually when people get hurt, when knees get hurt, people hit their heads, people are injured more frequently when you're standing. When you get them down on the ground, you're less likely to have to use other types of use of force at that point. So that's why decentralization is probably our most common, well, it is our most common use of force. 73% of the time, that's what we do. Our second most common is a TASER. Now, TASER is a less lethal use of force. It is not 100% successful. In our usage, it is successful 65.3% of the time. So a majority of the time it is, but it's not a panacea. It doesn't always work, especially in Wisconsin and especially in the cold weather months where people have jackets, thick jackets, have thick pants on. They don't always work. I've been tased plenty of times, but I've also been OC'd with pepper spray and gas. A taser deployment is 5 seconds where it disrupts your body and you're locked up. Feels like a mosquito bite, but after the 5 seconds is over, you don't feel anything. So they look horrific, but it actually is not that painful. And it is, like I said, the second most common use of force that we have. After that, we drop into what we call the hand strikes. These are to protect ourselves or others against active resistance or being assaulted. So 14% of individuals were struck by an officer's hand. 8.5% of individuals were struck by an officer's knee. Generally, this occurs when they've been decentralized and when they're trying to get them into handcuffs. It's similar to a hand strike, except with a knee. Vertically stunning is basically what a decentralization is, except it's against an object, like a wall in an apartment or a squad car, bending someone over the hood or a trunk of a vehicle to try to control them, to hold them down while you try to get them into handcuffs. That's what a vertical stun is. And then deadly force. Tragically, we've had to use deadly force 6 times in the last 10 years. Of the 6 times, 5 of them involved a firearm. One of those times was a facsimile firearm, and 1 involved a sword. So there's a weapon involved in every one of them. I was asked at the state task force on racial disparity what the race was of the individuals involved. There's a Hispanic male that was involved with the sword. The facsimile firearm was a white male. That was an individual that lived, that survived. There was a handgun incident with a white male, a shotgun incident with a white male, a handgun incident with a black male, where the individual that was killed was actually an innocent bystander. The individual with the gun that was shot was a black male, but tragically there was an innocent bystander standing behind him that also got shot and that died in that incident. And then last year, the transit center, I think everybody's seen the video. That was an African-American male that was involved in that incident with a handgun. So those were our 6 incidents of deadly force in the city of Appleton. The next several slides really, I think, surprise people. I know they surprise other law enforcement officers and chiefs when I talk about this, because it is kind of unique. This isn't something you see in a lot of other agencies. And it's because of the training that we do and what our expectations are. We have only had 1 incident in this 10-year period where a canine has bit an individual. Our dogs don't generally bite. They indicate on an individual, they track, but they don't generally bite. This individual that was bitten during this time frame was actually an individual that was suspected to be armed, hiding up in an attic. So they put the dog up in the attic, and he bit the individual, and they both fell through the floor. They both ended up getting injured. But that's the 1 incident that we had involving a canine bite. This next use of force is called a diffuse strike. I've never been trained in it in 35 years in Wisconsin. It still is in the DAT manual. I don't know many agencies that do train in it. The easiest way to explain it is it's basically securing an individual's side of their neck on one side and then striking them very hard on the other side of the neck and shutting off the blood supply quickly to the brain where they pass out. I've never seen it used. I've never heard of it being used. I don't know why it's still in the manual, but it is. But obviously we've never done that. This one is really shocking to people because it's not what you see in the media, right? It's not what you've seen on the news. We have not used a baton on anyone in 10 years. 0. They all are required to carry it in case they need it. We've never used one. Same with this. You hear people and outcry about pepper spray and gassing people in protests, and you see the videos. We have not used OC spray in the city of Appleton in the last 10 years. Never. So this slide I want to spend some time on, obviously, because it's a really important part of the discussion. It's about race. So we talked, all these documents I have and all the information and data, we can break it down to basically anything from race to age to what they were arrested for, where they were arrested, the time of day, who arrested them. Really have a lot of information that we can pull out what we need to. Individuals by race involved in the use of force. The question I had when I looked at this, well, I had 2 questions. Number 1, were we using force excessively or more frequently against Black individuals versus white? So to look at frequency, you can see here, whites were involved in 400 of 598, Blacks 129 of 598, Hispanics 38, etc. If you go to the percentages down on the bottom, you look at the percentage, 66.9% were white, 21.6 Black, 6.4 Hispanic, 2.8 Asian, Native American was 2%, and other was 0.6. So when we look at frequency of use of force, we compare it to the demographics of people that we arrest. We don't compare it to population because we don't arrest by population. 50% of our population is female, but we don't arrest. 50% of the people we arrest are not female. So when we look at force, we look at the people that we arrest. What percentage of them do we use force against? If you look at frequency, the rate at which we use force against our African American citizens is directly proportionate to the arrest rate. Here it's listed at 21.6% of our use of forces are African American. So subsequently, 21.6% of our arrests should be African American. And that's generally where we fall. In the last 10 years, we are between 18 and 22% of our arrests are African American. And if you look at violent crimes, that number is even higher. And we know use of force is used most frequently against people that are arrested for misdemeanors and felonies. We rarely use force against people that are just issued citations because they know they're not going to jail. They're just going to get issued a citation and released. But when we start arresting people for aggravated assault, serious felonies, violent crimes, chances are they will resist at a higher level than other people. So we compare arrest rates, offender rates to use of force rates. So when we look at those two, they are proportionate. The second question that I had was, is the type of force we use similar for whites and our people of color? The numbers that we have, again, in this 10-year study, de-escalation, if you remember, is the lowest level of force that we use. That's just placing someone on the ground. We use de-escalation more frequently on African Americans than we do on whites. So 74% of the time we use de-escalation on whites, and 75.2% of the time we use it on blacks. The next one that I look at are the more violent interventions: punches, kicks, hand strikes. Are we using punches, kicks, hand strikes, knee strikes more frequently against African Americans than we are whites, or whites than we are African Americans, or any of our other community members? So for hand strikes, we are using hand strikes more frequently against our white citizens than we are African American. For white citizens, it's 15%. For African Americans, it's 13.1%. We are using elbow strikes more frequently against our white citizens than our African American citizens. 2.5% for white citizens, 1.6% for African American citizens. And we use knee strikes more frequently against our white citizens than our African American citizens, 8.5% to 7%. The only significant difference, looking at use of force and race, that we could identify is residency. 60% of the people that we use force against that are white are Appleton residents. 49% of the people that are African American that we use force against are Appleton residents. So a majority of those involved that are African American are not city residents. And there'll be a slide that will talk to that a little bit. So that was the only significant difference that we could see in any of the racial data as far as use of force. And I think this is what might explain quite a few of those other numbers. The city of Appleton is broken down to 3 districts. The Northern District, which is basically north of the downtown area to the northern city limits. The Downtown District, which is basically Wisconsin Avenue, College Avenue, the Entertainment District, the bars, which you see in red. And then the Southern District, which you see in gray, which is everything south of the river. Our districts are separated by call volume, so they all have a similar number of total calls. So, for every year, our Northern District and Downtown District and Southern District will generally have about the same number of calls. But the use of force in the Downtown District, as you can see, is dramatically higher than the other districts. I think that is indicative of our Entertainment District. The number of liquor establishments that we have on College Avenue, obviously, which also would explain why over 30% of our use of force arrests are with people that are under the influence. It may also explain why the majority of African Americans that we use force against are not Appleton residents. If you've been downtown, you will see that there is a tremendous influx of people. We get people from Green Bay to Milwaukee coming to our downtown to enjoy it because it's a fun place to be and there's a lot to do. But along with that comes more activity, more disagreements, more arrests, especially around bar close. And we see this heightened use of force in that district. Body cameras. I've only got a couple slides left here. I know I'm running late. So body cameras, we've had them for 14 years in the city of Appleton. It still kind of amazes me that some departments don't, but I understand why. They are extremely expensive, especially for a larger agency. But we've been able to record, as you can see in blue, the overwhelming majority of our use of force since 2010. 2015, we upgraded our body camera program to include all officers, our school resource officers, some of our investigators, our supervisors. So we've gone to the point where we've got 92%. In the last 5 years, 92% of our use of force incidents have been recorded on body camera video. Last year, 2019, we were up to 94%. So we're getting close to having 100% of them recorded on body cam video, which it doesn't capture everything, but it definitely is a lot better than not having any body cam video. As we get new technology, which we purchased this last year, we are going to see some auto activation features on the body cameras, where they will now auto activate when an officer pulls their firearm or pulls their taser, or there's a loud gunshot. It'll auto activate and turn on, so the officer doesn't have to think about doing that. That's been the area where we've lost or not recorded some incident in the past, when there's a sudden assault and the officer doesn't have time to turn on the body camera. So hopefully the auto activation is going to catch that in the future. I'm going to run through the summaries quick here. When we use force, over 82% of the time, the individual we use force again is not injured. The most common, like I talked about, is decentralization. In a 10-year period, we haven't used baton, OC, or the brachial stun, and we had that one canine bite back in 2014. From over 25,000 arrests, we have had only 2 citizen complaints on use of force. Both of them were not sustained because they were both on video, and they were both justified uses of force. We talked about the deadly force in the last 10 years. We talked about that. All right, I know that was a lot. I apologize, but I can guarantee you there's a whole lot more. If you want to look at the whole 160-page report, which goes into more detail, it is listed on our website, on our Green Bay or Appleton Police Department website. There's a banner on the left-hand side. I'll just send you the link out later. It's just easier than trying to get to our website. Our website is a bit confusing at times. So I'll make sure I send that out to you. So now I would like to just kind of open it up for questions. I'll try to look for hands or just speak up if you have any questions specifically to use of force.
I have a question, Chief.
Yes, Gabriella.
So I guess twofold. In regards to the training, there's a minimum of 24 hours per year training. Do we feel like the quantity of hours is sufficient for, I guess, like, do most officers only do 24 hours, or is there, I'm sure, more than that, most likely?
Yes. Yeah, most of them do a lot more than 24. 24 hours is the minimum set by the state. And that's the minimum amount that we have to report, but the vast majority of them do a lot more than that. I mean, we have some officers that train 8 to 12 hours a month in their specialties. So the 24 is the basic minimum. That's what you have to report to the state to keep your certification. We go well above that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then my other question was, you mentioned if an officer is involved in use of force 5 or more times per year, there's a review process to that. Do you have the number on hand about the percentage of officers that happen per year, or just?
I know it's in this book.
I guess I was just curious.
I do have it. I just don't know it off the top of my head, but I'll get it to you.
Okay.
I'll send it out. The number of that we've had to review. And it is done, that review is done by a different supervisor. So, say a supervisor, an officer working on night shift, it's Lieutenant Smith that reviewed his 5 incidents. Lieutenant Smith isn't going to re-review the 5 incidents. It'll be another supervisor. And then that supervisor will report to a captain, a different captain, what his decision or her findings are.
Okay,
So I will get you the number that we have had to do though.
thank you.
Keith, I think I see Keith, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed on that the body cam footage where you were showing the percentage that's recorded. In 2012, it seemed like it dipped significantly. Do you know why that was? Because the rest of it seemed pretty even keel, but it just seemed like in 2012 it dipped significantly.
I do not. I came here in 15. I don't know if Beth knows everything, honestly. I don't remember that. That was back when we had a V-View system at the time, and I know they were sharing body cameras. So we didn't even have enough for each officer. They had to share them. 2015, we went to Axon, where every officer had a camera. So do you know, Beth? I don't want to put you on the spot. No.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
It's on the other hand. Martha.
Yeah, when you guys record the use of force, do you record the highest, because I'm assuming sometimes there's multiple uses of force used in one incident. Do you record the highest use of force or every single one that is used?
Every single one that's used. So if we decentralize somebody and they can't get them in handcuffs and another officer uses knee strikes or hand strikes, that's all recorded. So the decentralization, hand strike, knee strike, and then every officer involved does a report and it's all included in the database.
Okay, thanks.
There's not a hierarchy. Elijah?
So how do officers, like, when did they have enough probable cause to use violence, just going straight in? Is there any steps that they take to decide that?
Sure. Under the approach considerations, that first step, verbalization is always first. There's another technique that we train here since 2012. And our trainer calls it the reactive resistance. He's actually, one of them just retired and they're going to go train nationally on it. But what the reactive resistance concept is that we've been talking about since 2012 at APD is being aware of actually initiating a resistance. If I'm walking up to you and I get within 2 or 3 feet, you're going to get tense. If I reach out and touch you, your natural human reaction is to push back, right? So what we train our officers is to make a conscious effort when you're going to take someone into custody, when you've tried to negotiate with them, you've tried to come to a different conclusion, you've tried to get them to agree with you, you tried to get them to leave and they won't leave, whatever it is, and you're going to take them into custody, you actually step back. You step back 2 steps, you verbally let them know that they're under arrest and you need them to turn around and put their hands behind your back, and you step back and you let them process it, which is different than a lot of agencies train. It's different than some of the academies used to train. There used to be a concept or this belief in law enforcement years ago that the more time that you gave them to think, the more time they're going to think of a way to run, resist, or attack you. That's changed now. We train differently. We want them to be able to comprehend what just happened. Usually when you come to an arrest situation, people are already heightened. Sometimes 30% of the time they're under influence of an intoxicant or a drug. They're not comprehending what's going on. Frequently there's mental health issues involved in it. So we want to make sure that they clearly understand what's going on. So we step back, and again, it's the reactive resistance concept. You don't see a lot of agencies train that. I think because we train that, and that is a philosophy here at the department, I think that's why you see such significantly low uses of force. I think that's why you see that we haven't used a baton in 10 years. We haven't had to pepper spray anyone in 10 years. It's because of that philosophy, that ingrained philosophy. Did that answer the question, Elijah? Or?
Yeah, thank you.
Joy. You see Joy? Oh, and then Kanan. Sorry, Kanan. Oh, Kanan, you're using your little hand thing there. Sorry about that.
Oh,
no, I also did the raise hand thing on the what you call it too. But anyway, I got a couple of questions. I'd like to start off with I wondering if you can explain the term going direct when it comes to the officers, and also, I mean, just for my definition, would you explain what the term going direct mean? And also, is that tracked any type of way? So is it any type of way to track how many times the officers go direct?
Go direct as far as go in right away, take someone into custody? Is that what you mean? Without talking?
No, it was explained to me as drawing a weapon. Is that a term that's used with your department any type of way?
I've never heard that term.
Wow.
Go direct, I've never heard that term. For drawing a firearm?
Yes. No. Meaning if the officer, just say, an officer might be going into a situation and they might say over the intercom or to anybody else or another officer, like, I'm going direct right now. Is that an actual thing?
I've never heard of it. 35 years. So.
All right. I got another question if you don't mind.
Sure.
You were explaining about the downtown district having more contact than the police contact than the other districts. And I'm really confused on how things aren't compared by population. Like, you got a lot of percentages, but they're not, I think it's not fair, or I'm not understanding why it's not done based on population, because if it's 30% of blacks being, arrested or dealt with certain type of ways by the police, with the population of blacks in the city, I think that doesn't make sense to me.
No, I get
at
it.
all.
Yeah, I know.
And another thing, you said something about 30% aren't Appleton residents, and me personally, I mean, like, when I even think about my own situation, when I first moved here, I was harassed by police repeatedly, and I don't know if that's a way for the officers to say you're not welcome here, or whatever the case may be. But it takes time sometimes. Like, it took me about a year to get my Wisconsin driver's license. I had an Illinois, but so I'm still living here and I'm still working here, so that could also go into that population as well.
Right. Yep, the whole idea, the concept behind the statistics and the numbers and comparing use of force to population. Like I mentioned, the best comparison is females. We don't arrest, even though females are 50% of the population, we don't arrest 50% of the females. We don't use force against 50% of the females. So when we talk about using force, we're not using force against the general population. We're using force against the people that we arrest. So for 100 people that we arrest, if 30% of them are Hispanic, 30% are African American, then 30% of them, if our arrest is proportionate to our use of force, or use of force is proportionate to our arrest, then we should only be using force 30% of the time against that group. So if we had 5% of the arrests are Native American, but we used force against them 40% of the time, that's dramatically high. That is dramatically disproportionate. So when we compare use of force, we compare it against the numbers arrested. And we know disproportionately African Americans are arrested at a much higher rate than the population numbers. The good news is, in Appleton, those are coming down dramatically. They've come down since Like I said, I got a lot of charts.
But do you think that's because it's been less racial profiling by your officers?
I think it's a couple things. I think some of it is training in the last 10, 15 years. I think some of it is also our African-American population is growing and the city's becoming more diverse.
Well, Chief, my problem is this.
Yep.
All of these statistics and everything, it don't really, in my opinion, it doesn't really reflect what I'm hearing in the Black community at all. So, I mean, everything that you're saying makes it as if the department doesn't need any work. They doesn't need to be, it doesn't need any help,
No, not at all.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it really
saying.
seems as though you all got it completely together.
No.
Opposed to,
absolutely. No, I hear
seriously.
No, we are very proud of how we use an address force, but we also know that we can do a lot better. We also, and I tried to find the numbers for you, but we're down just in the last 3 years from 2015 to 2018. The percentage of arrested African Americans in Appleton is down 46%, and it's been going down steadily since 2010. So it's getting better, but because it's getting better shows that we had improvements to make, and we still have improvements to make. So, absolutely, it's not 100% where we need to be at, and I don't want to say it's we're good. We don't need to make any changes because we absolutely do. That's why we're having these discussions. That's why we're trying to grow the diversity in our department. That's why we're trying to increase the training that we're having on cultural diversity. We're working with Karen. I don't see Karen Nelson on here, I don't think. But we're working with Karen on Government Alliance on Racial Equity. We're one of the few cities in the state that actually has a GARE program and a GARE project that we're working on as a city. So we are getting there. I know the numbers are confusing. But like I said, when you look at use of force and you compare it to arrest rates, they are similar. But that doesn't say that the arrest rates are not disproportionate. That's not what that says. The arrest rates are disproportionate.
Okay, because I mean, honestly, if I was a white Appleton resident and I looked at those numbers, all of the numbers your department ever brings out, I'll be like, wow, this is an awesome, nothing goes on here. You'll get that impression when that's not actually reality, in my opinion.
Nope, I absolutely understand. Appreciate that. Oh, Karen is here. Hi, Karen.
I just wanted you to see my face.
I threw Gare out there for you.
Sorry, I was eating a little bit of late night.
No, and I don't know, maybe if you want to talk about, I mean, Gare has gotten a lot of traction in the last several months here under the new mayor.
So I just wanted to point out to people that that the chief came on in 2015. You came on a couple of years before me, Chief. And why that is significant is because even though we still have a lot more work to do, the fact is that this particular administration has really taken it head on in terms of recognizing what we do still need to work on in the city of Appleton. And so when the opportunity came for joining GARE, which is the Governmental Alliance on Racial Equity, I'm very, very proud to say that that the chief was the first to say, sign me up. This was long before COVID, long before the summer of unrest, of social unrest. And I'm looking to see if I could find what article I had. But if you pick up the, thank you, it's the October issue of Appleton Monthly Magazine. That's the one where you'll see, if you can still get it, it's actually online. I was looking for the chat, Chief or Beth. It's not activated tonight. No. So I could just drop this in there, but I can share this with you, Beth and Chief, to send out to everyone.
Yeah, if you could, we'll share with everyone. We can't have a chat box because it's a public meeting.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You sure did explain that. So this is the article that I wrote in that issue called Racism is a Crisis. And it talks about GARE in greater detail. That's my only reason for pulling all this out. And it talks about how we are looking at it from declaring race as a health crisis in the city of Appleton. We did that in February of this year, just before COVID hit in March. And we've been working on that because there are, let me just try to quickly kind of describe to you this GARE framework, because it goes in 3 parts. There's individual racism, there's institutional racism, and there's structural racism. If you can imagine all 3 like a churning gear of a mechanical something or other, you have all 3 of those moving parts together moving at the same time. And what we are focusing on with GARE is we're ready to get beyond just the training and all that individual, I like to call it that annual inoculation of, okay, I've had my diversity training for the year, I'm good, I'm done. No. We're talking about what else can we take a look at in terms of policies, procedures, something as simple as how do you go about getting a library card? And how do we talk to people when you say, oh, I want to go and get a library card, or don't you know you need to have ID? Or is it, well, we would like to let you know that we welcome you and we want you to know that this is the process, that you need to have an ID and that kind of thing. It's all about the individual piece, but also targeting how do we break down and dismantle that. So we have working groups inside of GARE, and the chief is a part of the police enforcement piece. I'm a part of the equity officers group. And so we are looking at tackling this thing from a totally structural standpoint, not just a little bit of feel good stuff and we're done. And so that's what GARE is all about. So I will send you the link to still find this article online. And that's what I wanted to contribute to the conversation. Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Karen. Any other? Hey, Kristen.
Hi. So this is kind of a little bit away from what we were just talking about. Is there anything written in policy about what to do for a family that, like, for instance, the gentleman you were talking about who got killed downtown by mistake? Is there anything written for what needs to happen with that family, or how to handle the family of someone who was killed?
There, through the district attorney's office and the State Department of Justice, there are victim witness coordinators. So the family can work with the district attorney's victim witnesses and also the State Department of Justice victim witness, Crime Victims Association and Department of Justice. So there are resources for them as victims, and the family, the survivor as victim.
But from the standpoint of the police department, so after that happens, it's kind of like hands are brushed off, and that's all that you guys touch of it after that?
Well, at that point, then it goes to those other providers. We don't have a victim witness program in the city or at the police department. We do some victim services, but that's more related to domestic violence and other. We're working with victims and crimes that are occurring or going through the court process. But those other services are available, and there's also obviously civil remedies if they choose a civil remedy. So.
Do you think there is any? Sorry about that. Do you think that there is anything that the police department can do, or does that have to be all legal?
That's through legal services.
Okay.
Shannon, I saw your hand. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Chief, before you go on, I just wanted to ask Kristen if she has any idea. She's got she's got a great mind, and I respect it highly. So if you have some suggestions along that line, do share, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliment. I don't necessarily have any thoughts right now because it kind of just popped in my head, but I mean, just the fact nationwide, when you see tragedies happen, when they do happen, I've always been very disgusted by the fact that the police departments don't say anything. And I just didn't know exactly what all goes behind that and why that doesn't happen. And if that were to happen again in Appleton, if even words, I mean,
Right.
but I understand if it's a legal thing, but yeah.
Yes. You know, well, you know, all I can say about not talking specifically about an incident is generally when there's an incident like that, we are put on notice by attorneys of a pending claim or lawsuit, and at that point, the attorneys tell us we can't comment or be involved, and then the attorneys take over. So that's part of that. But there is, yeah, like Karen said, if you have other ideas or suggestions of some way we can navigate that legally, but there's also the other resources for victims through the county and the state Department of Justice. Kanan, I thought I saw your hand.
Yep. My last question, but going back to my first question, is there a way, or has there been a way where you all are able to track when your officers pull their weapon? Regardless of the term I use, I feel that, you know, it's certain situations where officers may pull their weapon when they shouldn't pull their weapon. And I'm worried, I'm wondering, is there any way that you all track when your officer and why your officers will pull their weapon out?
Pull their
You know,
firearm?
like for, you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I know. Pull their firearm or pull their taser or both?
Firearm.
Firearm? Okay. I know that is something new that some departments are starting to do it. We have not done that yet. I know we're in discussions about steps going forward. Well, is that what you mean by go direct?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Remember,
because
I'm 55, Kanan. I don't know.
No, but if you think about it, you know, it's times where I've seen, this hasn't happened to me in particular, but I've seen officers pull their weapon when it was no real reason that they should be pulling a weapon for certain things. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I got it now. Yeah.
And it could be very intimidating. You know what I'm saying? I'm ex-military. To get a weapon pulled on me is kind of traumatizing in a certain type of way. It makes me feel a certain type of way, and I'm sure other people as well.
Yep. No, I got you now. We'll have some discussions. I will get back to you on that, though. That is something that is being tracked more frequently, and that was one of the discussions with the state task force. Going forward, we'll probably see some recommendations from them as far as tracking things like that, and that may be one of the things that we're going to see statewide. So,
and then even when they pull their weapon, is it on a black person? Is it on a white person? Hispanic? You know, in what situation is it more than likely for an officer to pull their weapon?
For us, it would actually be fairly easy to add because it's just another box that we put into this database that we already have had for 20 years. It's just another like decentralization or a hand strike. It's drawing firearms. So it would be, I'll have to talk to the people that put it together, but it should be a fairly simple add for us.
And let me ask you this. So if an officer pulls their firearm, right away, does other officers know? Is it something that they get on the intercom and say, like, well, weapon drawn or something
Sometimes
like that?
they do. Yeah, sometimes they do. They'll depending on the situation, they'll say, usually it's like I have one at gunpoint or I have three at gunpoint, just so other officers pulling up know. But you know, occasionally they do. Okay. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Chief. To Kanan's point, I was wondering if an officer has their firearm drawn and they successfully de-escalate, is that recorded as a de-escalation in that case in the database? Or does it, because it doesn't go to lethal force unless lethal force is actually used, right?
Yeah, we don't track de-escalation because, you know, like I mentioned, that happens on basically every call. So how do you track that? Now, is there a way to track when we draw a gun and then we don't use it, or draw a taser and don't use it, or, you know, threaten OC spray and don't use it? It's possible. Again, that's a discussion I'm going to have with our trainers and the people that run our program, if that's possible. So, but as far as using documenting every de-escalation, that literally is, you know, majority of the calls. So I saw, yes, Tamari.
Yeah, hi, Chief. First of all, I want to say thank you for what you've been doing. I've seen this played out several times in the past, and I've been in Milwaukee, and I've compared Milwaukee and Wisconsin areas compared to what is happening in this area. So I would say, I think you're doing a better job. So I think your team is doing a better job. So thank you so much for that. That is one. Number two is, I saw in your presentation that you said disengagement is not an option. I'm trying to understand what you mean by that. So does it mean that if the police is engaged, they can't let go the person or the subject that they're dealing with unless they get him arrested or something?
Yeah, when I'm saying disengagement isn't an option, it would be when we are like mandated to make certain arrests, like a domestic violence situation where, you know, we can't leave, we have to make an arrest by law, or like the transit center, you know, where we've got somebody being attacked, where we have to take action, or a bar fight where we can't disengage and let somebody get hurt, or we come across an incident like that, or one of our officers gets attacked. We had an officer just this last year who was attacked in our parking lot. He was just walking out the side door at 3 or 4 in the morning, and an individual walked up to him, stared at him, was staring through him. You could clearly tell he was in some type of emotional crisis. Had his hand hidden behind his leg. The officer put his hands up and tried to get him to talk, and started backing away from him. The individual charged at him. The officer did not shoot him because he did not see the knife until he was already stabbed. He could have shot him, but he didn't. Instead, he got stabbed several times, and he took the guy into custody. You didn't see that in the media. It could have been justified shooting, and the guy could have died. Instead, the officer got some stab wounds in the shoulder and the back, because he tried to disengage. He couldn't disengage because he was attacked.
Okay.
Most of you didn't see that in the paper, and it wasn't in the news. It was actually reported on page 5 of the Post-Crescent in a little blurb. Is where they.
Okay. All right. Yeah. The reason why I'm saying that is sometimes it can turn deadly. So the question is probably it can affect even the people around the community, that somebody's shooting and a straight bullet actually go to somebody that is not actually intended for. So that's why I'm trying to understand what you mean. But I think the first thing is to make sure that the environment is safe as well, even though we're chasing the subject. That is one.
It's a balancing act. Like you said, there's times we have weapons calls or people that are suicidal where we can't leave them, we can't disengage, because there may be other people in the house with them. That happens frequently. We get suicidal people and they have family members or kids in the house with them. Where if they were by themselves, we would just leave and try to talk with them through a phone or a crisis worker. But there's times we can't do that just because of the safety of other people involved. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. So one other question that I have for you is, you have shown us what your team has done for the past 10 years. So now the question is, what other areas are your teams working on that they felt that needs to be addressed? As in, because it's good to see because I love the numbers, especially when I look at the percentage of African American compared to the number of people who were, as in about 21% of African American, 21% of Hispanic and stuff like that. So it looks like it's a little bit very, very good game. But the question is, what are the areas that your teams are now looking at? Okay, these are some areas based on the statistics and the data that you have received for the past 10 years. If we can work on this area, it can strengthen us more. And have you identified those? And what are your teams doing about it?
I love that question. Absolutely love that question. Because that's exactly where our discussions are now. In our next session, we're going to talk a lot about that because we're going to talk about our mental health response team and our behavioral health officer. That is an area where I think we can make some significant changes in arrest and use of force. We are working right now on putting together a mental health response team with a clinician embedded, a social worker embedded at the police department. So it's not just law enforcement responding to these calls. Model that there's a couple other agencies already have. So I foresee, my vision is as we move forward in law enforcement, you're going to continue to see this philosophy of de-escalation not being just a tool or technique, but being an overarching philosophy for a department. I think you're going to see a lot of alternatives to arrest. We have made some significant changes in how we approach juvenile offenders. And just because of that, in the last 5 years, we've reduced the number of arrests of juveniles by over 70%.
Wow.
We're starting to use some of the same approaches, the alternatives to arrest for diversion in our court system. So there's a lot of discussion going forward about, we've always talked about how we can't arrest our way out of problems. We can't arrest our way out of the drug issue. We can't arrest our way out of addiction. You're starting to see more traction and more people understanding that is a much better solution, but there's also a huge cost to that. And we need the lawmakers and the policymakers to be willing to fork out the money to support the diversion programs, diversion courts, the treatment courts that we already have, but we need to expand. And the mental health. I think you're going to see, that's one of the areas where we've seen an increase in the use of forces on our homeless individuals and people with mental health crises. So that's an area that we can make some improvements, and we can drop those numbers down by focusing on those areas.
Makes sense. And sorry, my last question. Sorry. Thank you so much, Chief. And then the other thing is, Kenan mentioned about in the Black community, some of the data may not actually be meaningful to them. So, so the question is, how are you gathering data, or how are you sending information to that community to make them to be more comfortable, and then to hear them in a way that you can understand the uneasiness among the Black community, which I belong to. So how are you sending those information to those Black community, or how you let everybody feel among, okay, yeah, we see the data now. The question is, okay, is everybody feeling the secured or the safety? And then if there's a concerns, how do we hear them out?
Yeah, and that's where we, I'm open to any suggestions from the board on what else we can do. If there's other groups that we can reach out to, I reach out to a lot of the same groups. I've done a presentation now multiple times. I've reached out to some of the African American leaders and offered to sit in their business or sit in their church lobby Sunday morning and just be there at a table to answer questions. So we'll continue to offer that. Anybody that wants to have us in. Again, understanding there's not just one place to go, but also me not understanding exactly where do I all need to go? Where am I missing? And that's kind of where we lean on the community members to tell us, why don't you come over here and talk to these people, or why don't you meet us at this place and talk to these people?
Exactly. Okay. So that's a good thing for us. So we can set up programs and invite you to it, and then you can help us give some more informative stuff about what's going on in the police world to the community. Thank you so much, Chief.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in, Chief, and say I think that that it's very noteworthy that so much has changed, of course, because of COVID driving all of us into our homes. But when we're back to normal, whenever that is, in terms of getting out in the community, or even now, even following CDC guidelines. I know the chief was just at Appleton Sanctuary most recently. and those kinds of opportunities. And I got to meet Blue, the little police dog, at an African Heritage event. So I think the more that we can get out in the community and really have that engagement, and I know COVID's really impeding that to some degree, but let's not make that an excuse for not, you know, calling out the APD into whatever safe, socially distanced way that we can in terms of getting out into the community.
Absolutely. Christy, thought I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just had a comment going back to the use of force. It seems like that's all we hear about on the news is excessive use of force, and yet you just said something a few minutes ago about this officer that was stabbed in the parking lot, and it made page 5 of the Post-Crescent. So if that had been anything else, it would have been on the morning news. It would have been on the front page. Why isn't the other side of the story about things that happen to the officers, why isn't that just as important and doesn't make the news or the front page? Why is there this gap there?
I don't know. You know, we've seen it for years. I think some of it is just there's an expectation that comes with a job. You know, I've actually sat in meetings where I've had community members tell me that I get paid to get shot. You know, tell my 12-year-old daughter that, you know, she doesn't believe in that. So I think some of that is that, and I think it's just, you know, we are focused right now, and as we should be, on some of the racial justice issues that have been going on since the start of this country. We have made headway, but there still is a ways to go. So I think there is a tendency to make sure that we're focusing on that. You know, cops generally don't care. We don't really like getting media attention anyways. But, you know, I don't have an answer for why. I can't answer for the media. Definitely changed from what it used to be, but we continue on. One of the things that I thought was really productive out of the task force that I just attended last week was some of the discussion about confirmation bias, and people have an understanding of what the media is nowadays. They really do. They're a lot smarter than we give them credit for it sometimes. So they get it. But you know, the focus really needs to be on what it's on and what the discussion is on, and that's the overarching racial justice issues that we've all been trying to work on. You know, we're blessed to be in this profession. I've talked about it before. Everybody that's in this profession, we wouldn't do anything else. Most of us would do it for free because that's what we love doing. And so that I don't think that'll ever change. But as far as the media, it is what it is.
So sometimes I think that when you said like that officer could have shot him and he didn't, and so there are instances where police have not used force when they had every right to. So sometimes I think we only hear one side of the story over and over and over, and it gives the departments a bad name, and across the country that all police are bad, let's defund them, and all of this talk all the time. And you don't really hear some of the stories that support the things you're doing, or, you know, like that story that you're telling us about, he could have shot him and he didn't. So sometimes I think there's just a big communication gap that way. And, you know, maybe people who thought about being a police officer don't want to anymore because of all the things, the bad things they hear. They don't hear enough of the good things. And so I'm wondering how to change that.
We try to put as much positive stories out on our Facebook page as we can, because that's what we try to focus on. That's the positive part of it. You know, and the times that we don't use force or don't have to use deadly force, those aren't news stories, you know. And then for us, that's a win. You know, we don't want to hurt anybody. You know, I know a lot of officers who have had to use deadly force in their career, and I can guarantee you 100% of them, 100% of their spouses and their families wish they never would have had to. So that's the reality of it.
Thank you.
Thought I saw another hand. Armand.
Hey, Chief, just wanted to recognize the progress that you've made. One question I had is that I know you want to continue with that progress. And when you're looking at hiring, and you're looking at maybe a transfer of an officer, are you looking for those specific things that, could stand out to say they may not be the right fit, those levels of incidents that they've had? How do you vet all that?
Yep, well, just for instance, we are right now doing and we do it majority of the time through the background investigation. They've got to go through, before they get hired with us, they've got to go through a polygraph. They've got to go through a meeting with a psychologist and take a couple written tests. It's like a 4-hour meeting with a psychologist. But the background investigation is really where we vet out a lot of things. For instance, the investigation we're doing now on an officer candidate from Montana. Grew up in the Fox Valley, been a police officer in Montana for the last 10 years, and he wants to come back here. So we invested the money. We paid to send an investigator out to Montana to go and knock on every door in his neighborhood, to talk to his coworkers, talk to his bosses, talk to anybody else that may know who he is, just to vet it out and make sure that we're getting the candidate that we want, that there aren't any skeletons in the closet, which includes taking a look at his personnel file and all of his contacts and evaluations and comments from supervisors. So, the last thing we want to do is hire somebody that's been somebody else's problem.
And is this typical? Because it seems like I always hear that, there's transfers all the time and the record doesn't follow, and you just hear about that. So
that for most agencies, again, I've worked for 5 agencies in Northeast Wisconsin, and at least in Northeast Wisconsin, I can't answer for the bigger cities or, the Milwaukee, Madison, southern part of the state, but at least up here, that's the way all those agencies approach doing backgrounds and hiring people. When I was doing hiring for another agency, I basically had a lot of other colleagues of mine who also did hiring from other departments on speed dial, and we would call each other frequently saying, hey, I've got this candidate, Ben Grisby, maybe you've heard of him. You got anything on him? You got him in one of your processes? And we'll talk about candidates that way also. So around here, that's how we do it. I can't answer for other parts of the state or country.
okay, thank you.
I saw Joy.
Thanks, Chief. I have a question about the use of force and you looking for discrepancies between races with that. And one of the only thing that you mentioned that you found is that the majority of Black people that were subject to use of force were from out of town. And I just like, if you could elaborate on that, like, is that just an observation? Is that anything that comes into play into what you and the officers do?
No.
Can you just elaborate a little on why that was an important finding?
Sure, I think that it was just the most significant difference that we saw in numbers. And then if you take a look at that, and then you take a look at the number of use of forces downtown in the entertainment district. And if you've ever been downtown on a Friday, Saturday night, we get 20, 30,000 people down there. They're definitely not all from Appleton, because we'd have a lot of empty houses in Appleton. So I think that, it's people don't believe this, but we've actually had busloads of people come here from Madison and Milwaukee just to enjoy our avenue. So we get a lot of people from out of town on the avenue. So I think that might have something to do with it. Otherwise, it's all anecdotal. I was just noting that was the only significant number. The difference that we saw was that number.
Okay, thank you.
That is just kind of a guess. So, I thought I saw Gabriella. Oh, Lizette.
Hi, thank you, Chief. I have a question in regards to when the officers approach someone that is undocumented, does that scenario at all look different in terms of what you've explained to us tonight? How does that look?
Depends on what kind of call they're on. If they are making a traffic stop on them, they will just check driver's license status. We do not enforce immigration rules. We do not ask if anybody is here legally or if they're documented or undocumented. We do not have anyone trained with enforcing immigration laws. Some agencies do, some sheriff's departments do. We do not. So that is not something that we are involved in or we want to be involved in. That is a federal issue. I've made it very clear, which has upset some people in the community, and I understand why they feel like local law enforcement should be involved in that. But we truly believe that it's more important for us to have relationships with that community, that they trust us, and they call us if they need help, and we leave the immigration enforcement to the federal government.
Okay. And another question, Chief. When you're talking about the body cams, just so I understand it, because I feel like I'm not understanding fully, are the cameras automatically turned on in any encounter or only when does something trigger it? So then my question would be, if they are turned on automatically with any encounter, are they reviewed randomly like an audit, just like someone encountered me on the street or pulled me over? There was nothing that happened, but are those just in how the interaction went about? Do those get pulled for random auditing for someone to review maybe the behavior didn't get completely out of line, but something could have been improved in the interaction?
Yep. So they are both activated individually, and now we have them some systems in place where they're auto activated. So before this last year, they would have to be turned on. So an officer that was involved in an incident, we had one where an officer had her gun stolen and she was shot, and the suspect shot himself, committed suicide, shot another individual, citizen. That was not recorded because he suddenly assaulted her as soon as she got out of her squad car. The same with the incident where the officer got stabbed in our parking lot. He didn't turn on his camera because as soon as he walked out the door, the guy was there acting strange, and he was trying to communicate with him and back up away from him. So he didn't think to turn on his camera. So now the system that we just purchased has auto activation on it. So if an officer does draw their firearm or the taser, or there is a gunshot, there's a gunshot detection tool, it'll activate the body camera. So you'll say, well, what does that do if it only activates when the gun is shot? It's too late. Well, the way the system works, it's actually always recording. So when there's that gunshot, the camera turns on, but it automatically goes back 30 seconds and records the 30 seconds prior to the gunshot. So that's what we hope is going to catch some of the 6% that we didn't catch last year, the use of force. So it's both auto-activated and personal activation now, this year. In the past, it hadn't been. It had to have been turned on and off by an officer, which is where you miss some of the use of force.
And does this apply to the SROs in our schools?
Yes, the school resource officers all have a camera assigned to them. They actually use them probably more than anyone else, as they should. My wife is a school resource officer. She doesn't have one where she works. I would pay for it out of my own pocket if I could. I think in that environment is extremely important that they have cameras. So SROs have them. Our street investigators have it. Our investigators even use them when they go out and do interviews. As far as viewing, randomly viewing the body cameras, they can do it. I know some supervisors do if they have an employee or maybe they've received some complaints on, or it's a new employee and they just want to check in and see how they're doing. Maybe an officer under probation. They can randomly go in and select any video they want and just watch it. And I know they do, because they'll they'll talk about it, or when they do evaluations, when they do their yearly evaluations, they'll go through and they'll randomly sample some of the videos. And our officers know that, and they're perfectly fine with that, because we talk about if you're not proud of what you're doing, why are you doing it?
Thank you, Chief.
Yes.
Sorry, Chief.
Yeah.
This is just to support what my sister just saying. That the issue about the camera, sometimes have there been sometimes that you don't actually get a clue of the situations from your camera, as a meaning that you couldn't resolve the issues because there was no more information about the video.
Yeah.
Have you seen that kind of issues in the past?
Where the body camera video is not enough?
Is not enough to capture the enough information. Especially when let's say the police is actually struggling with somebody inside the car. And
yeah, usually you see what
I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, no, no, I know what you mean, because we've had videos where the camera gets knocked off and it ends up in a snowbank, things like that. They're attached by a pretty strong magnet, so they're a lot better than they used to be. But usually the times that you're talking about where it's just people wrestling around or you can't see what's actually going on, usually there's video leading up to it where you can see what led to that happening. So I haven't seen one yet where it's just you can't tell at all what's going on. Usually that's something that at least leads you to that point before the disturbance or the fight that happened.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, okay, would you recommend the civilians getting cameras into their car? Maybe that will have to go to the city. Karen is here, so there's a way they have to ask everybody to have a. Because I'm just because I've seen it on the TV. I'm not sure if it has happened in Appleton, that you will have some situations that you couldn't get a clear picture, but you will see a different story from the police, and then you will see another different story from the civilian. And then you have to, it's okay, what's going on here? So should we be recommending every one of us to have cameras in our car? Maybe that could be another, that's another thing I don't know.
Some people do already. It doesn't bother us because we just assume there's cameras everywhere. If people want to invest in a camera for their car, they can. You really want to see something interesting. If you go down on the avenue and there's some type of disturbance at bar close, or maybe there's 150 people standing around and a couple of officers walk up to handle an issue, boy, you want to see the cell phones come out. Literally, you got 150 cell phones out. Even though the cops maybe just be talking to the guy to, find out what he's getting to order from Sal's Pizza, whatever. Everybody breaks the camera out thinking something's going to happen and they got to tape it.
Yeah.
That's not an issue for us. I know what you mean though, because the body camera is only one perspective, and there are times you will just get one perspective from the officer, and if you look at a camera from a different view, you'll see something totally different.
Something different.
That does happen. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Edan.
All right, just unmuted. Can you hear me okay, Chief?
Yeah, excellent.
Question for you now. As a person of color, if I drive and I have, say, a concealed carry permit, okay, how is the use of force, especially if that person has it, it's legal, everything's on point, and you tell the officer that you do have a concealed carry? Because I know that there may be a double standard. I'm not trying to put it out there, but usually when people think of CCW, they think of white guys. No offense, white people. But when it's somebody of color and they happen to carry, a firearm for protection or what have you, how does that go about in terms of communication and so forth?
Generally, the officer will just ask you. If you don't, some of the drivers will tell us right away, hey, just so you know, I have a CCW and it's on my left hip, whatever. And the officer, we are so used to open carries and firearms and all that, even it's, they walk down the avenue carrying rifles pretty regularly. So
now, I'm not going that far, but I understand.
Usually we'll, most drivers, most CCW carriers are just really responsible, and they tell the officers right away, like, hey, just so you know. And the cops that I know, what I've done is like, hey, appreciate it. Just make sure you keep your hands away from it. And we're all good. And you finish up the contact and you move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now I'm gonna piggyback. The only reason I say that is because I know Finlando Castile had his CCW, and this was a situation where I know extreme situation, totally wrong. By the I want to say St. Paul police. I think it's either St. Paul, but in any way, the reason I say that is there are people who do have it and still get treated like a suspect.
Right.
So I mean, I'm glad we're doing this, but I think it's something that, I think it's always something I'm always nervous about.
No, yeah, I absolutely understand that. Yeah, again, that I think it was St. Paul or Minneapolis again, one of those two.
Yeah.
But we're honestly, we're so familiar with comfortable seeing firearms. We've got so many people that just open carry nowadays, especially in the last year or so. It makes us aware, but it doesn't make us nervous.
Okay.
I thought I saw Irma. Hey, Irma.
Hi there, and thank you again for a great presentation and sharing, the progress. The question I have is, do you see any correlation with body cams, whether it's not 100%, but do you see any correlation with decreased decreased use of force and a correlation with body cam increase? And in addition, aside from the correlation between the two variables, what are the sources of use of force relative to body cam?
Right. Because Appleton's had it forever, 14 years, it's hard to say what the impact has been, but I know there has been national studies on the impact of body cameras on behavior of both suspects, citizens, and officers. And I know the studies have proven that both the officer and the people they're dealing with are much better behaved when they know they're on camera. It leads to less use of force because of that. So I don't have any of those studies handy. I'm sure you could just Google it. But there's been plenty of studies to show the benefit of the body cameras. Luckily we had Chief Spec, Chief Myers, I think, started these. Beth, if I'm right, Chief Myers started the body cam program a long time ago. And he's retired, living on the mountains in Colorado now. But
that's like 23 years ago.
23 years ago, yeah, because he brought in the diversity coordinator also.
Right.
Yeah, so that was a chief that was generations ahead of his time. So
thank you.
We're getting close to 8, so I don't want to cut it off, but we have to at some point. I will ask you if you've got questions that come up either later or now that we didn't get to, just please email them to me and I'll answer them. I won't put your name on the question. So there you go. You got confidentiality. So ask me anything and I'll answer the question and I'll just send it out to everybody.
I just wanted to end with a couple of quick comments, if I may. I know you have invited this group to do so when it's safe after COVID, to maybe do ride-alongs with you and so on and so forth. But I can say from firsthand knowledge of having actually sat through and watching the quality, I haven't heard you mention that yet, the high quality of the video that I have been privy to having to see for other reasons that I won't state at this point in time. But the good news is that once you see the clarity, it was clear sitting down with the chief and with the individual involved that it was just indisputable in terms of the fact that there was no ambiguity. And that's what I like about, I mean, it wasn't cloudy and grainy or anything like that. And so I would really, encourage you to continue to encourage your advisory board to come in and actually witness some of that, so that way they can see firsthand the kind of what we're talking about. And then finally, I just wanted to close with letting everyone know I did go ahead and email to Beth to send out. The chief is so humble, he didn't mention that he was also featured in this media piece on the the speaker's task force on racial disparities task force that was in Green Bay. And I sent that link to Channel 5 News piece and also my article on racism is a crisis.
Thanks.
They can look for that as follow-up.
All right, so I've got a couple on my to-do list. I'm gonna find out how many officers have hit that level of 5 use of forces in a year. And I'll get that out to you. And then I'm gonna follow up on what it would take to add the drawing of a firearm into our use of force database and statistics and adding that going forward. So I'll follow up on those and I'll get back to you on that. Please email me any questions that you got. Like I said, I'll get back to you with that. The next session, what you guys had wanted to talk about was our mental health program and responding to mental health and crisis calls. So I'll put together a presentation on that, and then you will get to meet the one and only Nacho. He's not just a myth, he's not just a legend, he really does exist.
He is a legend.
You will get to meet Nacho, and I'll have him come talk to you, and you can ask him a lot of questions about what he does. So I appreciate it. Everybody, I hope has a happy holiday, safe holiday, stay healthy, keep fighting me, Ben. You got it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank everybody.
Christmas, everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays. Happy Kwanzaa. Happy Hanukkah.
There you go.
Thank you.
You got them all, Kanan.
Thank you.